That's right, Kamal. Some business groups are expressing concern about the government's latest revision of the vaccination process. We tell you what they are hoping will be done. Well, thousands of people showed up outside health centers this week to participate in the Ministry of Health's walk-in COVID-19 vaccination system. However, the Minister of Health said that he was surprised by the level of turnout. Now, the Market Facts and Opinion recently did a COVID-19 vaccination survey to find out from members of the public how they felt about it. Today, I'm joined by Nefertiti Manluli, who is the General Manager of the MFO, and Mr. Noble Philip, who is the Chairman of the MFO. And we're going to be diving a little bit deeper into that survey. Good evening. How are you all?
Good evening.
So let's start here. During that, while conducting that survey, how many people exactly said that they were hesitant on getting the vaccine?
Okay, well, before we get into those numbers, Bhavita, let me first set some context in terms of how the study was carried out.
Sure.
MFO, we would have conducted this study between mid-April towards the beginning of May, and we would have spoken to just about 973 persons across Trinidad and Tobago. And in conducting this study, what we would have been looking at in terms of this total sample would be ensuring that this sample was a representation of the varying demographic subgroups that we have across the island.
Right.
And therefore, with this, we're able to make inferences from the data to then make generalizations across the total population to understand what are the perspectives in terms of opinions towards getting vaccinated. Now, what we saw coming out of that were very interesting details in the data. And I want to take this time to say that when looking at the data, we should take as a nation, and for those of us who are in positions where we have decisions to make, to understand the data and to use that and apply that in making those decisions. We saw three key segments coming out of that shed light in terms of persons' perspectives. And we've labeled these three groups as the advocates, the uncertain, and the reluctant. So on the screen, you'll see some slides indicating what these groups are and who these groups are, and the number of persons in the population that they represent. So when we look at the advocates, you'd see that of these three segments, they represent the smallest share of persons across the country, but these are those persons who are optimistic about being vaccinated once it is available to them. And as we are seeing here, they account for just about 240,000 persons. And these persons are more likely than any of the other segments to be those that report being comfortable in terms of their financial standings, and they tend to have very optimistic outlooks for the future in terms of their own financial standings and their family, and also the financial standings of the country as a whole. Now, this is completely opposite for those who we saw fell within the reluctant group. These persons who we term the reluctants, they are averse to being vaccinated. They would have outrightly stated that they disagree, that should the vaccination. Yes, it is. It's a huge number. And we're also seeing where that number is quite similar for the uncertains as well.
Yes.
It's not very far off. And therefore, you have these two groups forming together with those who are not quite open to being vaccinated, and those who are saying, well, I'm not too sure, I'm undecided, I maybe don't have enough information to decide whether I should be vaccinated or not, if that is available to me.
So given the stats you all would have received during that survey, would you say that you all were surprised by the turnout this week for vaccines?
I wouldn't say that we were surprised, because if we look at the number of persons that would have registered as advocates and the number of persons across the country that has already been vaccinated, we have
Right.
not reached this number just yet. We are just over half of this count, and therefore we expected to see that type of or that number of persons coming out and wanting to be inoculated. I think where the challenge would lie would really be when this group of persons have gone through the process, how do we then reach to those who are within the groups of uncertainties or reluctance? And that is where, when we look deeper into the details of who form these profiles, that can shed light in terms of thinking about that.
Okay, so in terms of those who are reluctant, right, the latter two graphs, what do we need to do differently? What will you all suggest we do differently to change their minds?
I think the first step would be understanding who these groups are. So when we looked
Right.
at the advocates, these tended to be older persons in the 45 to 64 year age brackets, and therefore their concerns in terms of health issues, etc., would be very different from another age group. And that is what we saw happening when we looked at the reluctance, for example. They tended to be younger persons, those in the 18 to 24 age brackets, and they are exposed to so much information on social media and online about what getting vaccinated means or doesn't mean, and therefore they have so much going on in terms of what their decision should be and how to make that decision. I think it's a matter of understanding that subgroup and therefore thinking about how to approach them. Additionally, this group compared to the advocates was also the group that, and similar to the uncertains, these two groups, the uncertains and reluctants, were those who actually would have expressed that they are not as well off financially. They find that they are holding strain in terms of having a tight budget, and they do not have a positive outlook and hold a negative outlook in terms of the financial future for themselves, their family, and the country. So therefore, we see that these are two opposing groups in terms of their demographic standings, and is to think about how best to communicate to these groups individually and not just to cast an overall blanket in terms of communicating with these groups, but understanding who form each of these groups and how to reach them.
So maybe we need to change our messaging to these
That
groups.
definitely would be important.
I want to delve deeper into that, but I just want to bring Mr. Noble Phillip into the conversation. Mr. Phillip, were you surprised by the amount of people who showed up to be vaccinated this week?
No, I don't think I was surprised at all. As a matter of fact, I am disappointed that we didn't use the data that we had, because quite apart from the MFO data, there was data from the Ministry of Health. And if we look at the data from the Ministry of Health, in our second slide, you would see that at the beginning of May, we were just about 57,000 people had been vaccinated. And then when you look again in the next slide, at the beginning of June, there were 100,000 people. Now, if you look at that difference from the people we said were willing to be vaccinated, you are short by 100,000, 140,000. So that becomes an issue. What happens since that June 3rd issue is that you have to look at, again, what the Ministry of Health told us, which is how many persons are going to be infected. And that graph showed you that the infection rates were going to go up. Now, once we begin to know people who get ill, the thinking through of whether I should take a vaccine or not changes. So you don't need a survey for that. You need to watch your data and say, okay, people are going to now see in their homes, in their neighborhoods, that people are being infected. And again, the Ministry of Health showed us by a map what was happening. This map, to my mind, showed us clearly that the infection rates were all over the country, and there were some hot spots. So if you're going to attempt to deal with this issue in terms of vaccines, you had to have a sufficient number of vaccines to help the people who want vaccines. So this is akin to you calling a sale or having a panic situation at PriceSmart. What happens? Everybody joins the line and wants to get into PriceSmart, even though physically you can't get into the store. So you are creating panic for a situation that you did not manage, given what you knew people will do when they get into a place of fear. And that is the message that we were preaching. I think as well, because we have no firm dates in terms of the receipt of the vaccine, which was again something said last week, Saturday, when you go and say you're going to open it up to everybody, you are increasing the number of persons who will come forward.
Do you think what transpired over the last couple of days would somewhat frustrate citizens even more and probably worsen the numbers of people showing up outside those health centers? And that's one question. I want to ask you the other question one time as well. A lot of people were complaining about the appointment system. They were saying that, it was very frustrating for them. Like myself, I can tell you that I went through the WhatsApp system, and till this day, I have not received, I applied months ago, and I am yet to even receive an automated response. So do you think that that in itself will contribute somewhat to vaccine hesitancy?
Well, not really. Let me say that what we're seeing in terms of the hesitance is being driven, like Nefi said, by different kinds of belief systems. What you are speaking to is the process. And I think that the process, having failed, caused the Ministry of Health to believe that there was nobody wanting the vaccine. And probably they listened to the anecdotes on social media themselves, rather than watching their own data. So I think that is what happened with the failed appointment systems. But you have to realize that there were anecdotal information that said that people left the East-West corridor and went to places in Miaro, etc., where vaccines were not being taken up. So that becomes another issue. The second thing that I think you need to think about is that when we have done what we've done these last 2 days, you're going to destroy trust. Can I trust this thing to work well? And if I don't trust the process to work well, then we put pressure on ourselves in terms of, would I bother? So that may be what you're referring to, the hesitancy. Would I bother to even go with this thing? Or will I really believe that this thing will work? And that raises all kinds of other issues that we should not be having at this point in time. So I think we're in a state of flux, quite frankly.
What do you all expect going forward in the next couple of weeks? What do you all think will transpire, given everything that we've seen this week?
Well, I'll go first before Nefi goes. People have talked often about Barbados as an example of why we don't do like Barbados. And the reality is our society is different to Barbados. Whereas in Barbados, there is a tripartite arrangement where business, labor, and government work together. We don't have that here in Trinidad, as you know. We tried it several times, and every time it breaks up. Secondly, we don't have the unison or unity at the political level. And therefore, we are trying to score points on each other, which will not help us in terms of getting people to come together to do what is right and to work out the issues that need to be worked out. So I think that what we're going to see is a lot of sniping, and it's already started, a lot of sniping about the process, a lot of blame, a lot of finger pointing, all of which will not help us and will muddy the waters even more. I don't know what Nephi would tell you.
To add to that, I think we're also going to see that continued large groupings of persons who are going out every day to be vaccinated, because we do have so many subgroups who are concerned about not only their health, but also in terms of job security and in terms of finances. And we know that some of these subgroups are greatly impacted by the closure of businesses and so on.
Right.
And also having children at home, having schools closed. And therefore, for this group of persons who are as we label them, advocates again, persons who want to become vaccinated, and then those who would have been uncertain at the time of the study and may have now moved towards deciding that they will become vaccinated as things would have changed during that period. There would continue to be those, I think there would continue to be those large groupings, and it's a matter of how we decide to treat with it and to deal with that so that it can become a smoother process than we are experiencing now.
So, from what you've told us earlier on in the interview, it appears as though those who are reluctant and those who are hesitant fall within a certain income bracket, right? Or an economic standing in society. How should we change our message to reach these people? What do we need to do to get them to understand the process and to take that decision to actually get vaccinated?
Right. I think a big part of that is having those persons understand what being vaccinated and getting vaccinated means. I think there's a gap in terms of educating the public on what vaccination does for you, how it protects you, and what are the limitations. And with that gap, those gaps are actually being filled in with varying pieces of information all across online word of mouth
Yes.
that actually may not be, that isn't accurate. And therefore you have what's happening is that persons are fearful or making decisions based off of information that is incorrect. So therefore, be first of all educating the public and having campaigns that could inform persons of what it means, and doing it in such a way that it's understandable to persons of varying educational levels would be very important.
All right.
I think it's important as well that we have endorsers. The modern term is influencers in various communities who can be trusted, so that they can explain to the people in that community why they should be vaccinated. We cannot continue to be buffing people. We cannot continue to be invoking fear. It is not a fearful thing. It's about life. And with our message content has to change, and the persons who have to give the messages also have to change. It cannot be a government, Ministry of Health only campaign.
It needs to involve other sectors as well.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Philip and Ms. Manluli, for chatting with us this evening. We really do appreciate it. You've brought so much important data to us. And I look forward to your next survey.
Definitely.
When can we look forward to that?
Well, what we will be doing is keeping our eyes open in terms of what's happening on the ground. And when it comes to research and understanding people's point of views, it's not just numbers, but it's people that we're dealing with. So they have decisions to make. And in the process that we're in right now, a lot is happening, a lot is going on, and persons are processing what's happening, what it means for them, and what are the decisions that they are going to make in terms of, do I get vaccinated or do I remain unvaccinated? And we would allow that period to go through a bit before we decide to go back into the field and find out where person's standing is. So we will definitely keep the public updated in terms of when we're going out again to do data collection and to understand what's happening on the ground with regards to persons' perspectives on getting vaccinated.
All right. Thank you guys so very much.
Most welcome.
Thank you.
Well, it's now time for a short commercial break, but more when we come back.